The upcoming refresh of Fantasy, The Old World, is honestly one of the most promising looking new games from GW coming. I've always loved old Fantasy, and I just really cannot wait to replay it with my old armies again and getting back into that square-based fun that I had before Age of Sigmar came along. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I love Age of Sigmar, but there's just something about the ranked up armies and files and legions of infantry just marching across the battlefield in formation that, as a wargamer, I just love and I've never gotten over, never gotten old for. So I cannot wait to see the old world come back and just bring sort of my undead and my high elves back to the table again. And GW have been a bit cagey in giving us updates for it. They first announced it years and years ago, and they've kind of given us a very slow drip feed of information. But yesterday we did get a new developer diary, and it's one that had quite a few key changes that are coming in the old world that we may not recognize from certainly 8th edition Fantasy, but even some of the older editions as well. Some of these things seem like quite a big change. And whilst on the whole I think they seem promising and the old world itself sounds promising, there is a couple of issues in this dev diary that I just wanted to quickly cover in this video because I don't know, maybe I'm not super sold on, or I'm just maybe a little bit dubious about. I mean, I'll have to wait and see what the game is like. Obviously, I'm not going to prejudge anything, but there's a few things they mention in here that I'm just a little bit iffy about. So as I said, they gave us a few key changes coming in the old world, and there were 3 sort of new mechanical changes coming compared to old Fantasy, and the first of which they cover is the style of battle lines. And the way Fantasy worked, at least 8th edition, which is what I'm really going to focus on because I think that's what most people know and have sort of most recently in their memory. But the way Fantasy worked is that a unit could fight with models that were in base-to-base contact or diagonally contacting. So if you had a unit that was 3 rows deep with 9 models in each row against a unit that was only 5 models wide, you would get a situation where you would have 2 models in that front rank and the ranks behind that couldn't fight. And it's shown quite nicely in this diagram I've put up from the 8th edition rulebook. And then in the article today, they've said that they want people to have as many models fighting as possible, so even models not in base contact will be able to fight as long as they are in that fighting rank. So in this situation, from the sounds of it, all 9 of those models in that picture could fight even against that small 5-man rank unit. And to me, I'm just not that keen on that. I know there has been in previous editions the idea of a wrapping round, but to me this kind of takes away some of the tactical decision making of the game. Because obviously having a 10 wide horde style unit gave you a load more frontage and you could get more attacks against another 10 wide unit, but it was much more unwieldy, it was harder to kind of circle around and get those charges off, you have to be a bit more worried about terrain or other units. Whilst the other longer, thinner 5-wide units like zombies or Skaven slaves would tend to be, they obviously had a lot less attacks to put out because there was less frontage, but they got the benefit of their rank bonuses to help them stick around a bit more, and they could engage with the less of the enemy so they had less damage coming into them as well. And there was obviously the downside that they would potentially be at risk a bit more to flank charges due to their longer length, so there were sort of pros and cons to each. And it was a bit more of a decision you had to weigh up. Do I want this 10 wide unit, or do you want it in 7 or 6 or 8? Or do you want a unit that is going to be really long and thin just to kind of try and keep an enemy unit locked up and doing as little damage to you for as long as possible? Because these were sort of like your anchor units. It just seems to me that there is a risk. And again, we have to wait and see what the game is like when it comes out. This could all be completely factored into the rules and other rank bonuses and horde bonuses in the game that kind of remedy it. But to me, I think there is a risk that this change may just make it so that a maximum frontage 10 wide unit is going to be the de facto best option available no matter what you're bringing, just because you get the most attacks in and you're not kind of getting any downside because the enemy's still going to get a full rank attacking into you even if you are 10 wide or 5 wide. And to me, that just takes a little bit of the intricacy of Fantasy and how you actually want to deploy and set up and move your units out of the game. They also talk about the Winds of Magic, and I, for one, I'm sure there are some people that didn't, but I, for one, loved the magic phase. It was one of my favorite parts of the game. I loved how you rolled your magic dice, the enemy got their dispel dice, and then there were these series of roll-offs and loads of decisions you had to make about how many dice were you going to throw at this spell, how many dice were you going to counter it with a dispel of your own. It was a whole phase that felt very much like a mini game all in itself. It was kind of like the older 40k psychic phases, but just much more engaging and much more interactive and much more fun. And now it sounds like spells are going to be usable throughout the game at certain different points. So maybe when you get into combat, a wizard will be able to do a bonus strength spell or something like that. So it's nice and easy and you will know when to do a certain spell to get the most out of it. And I can see the appeal for that. But again, to me, if I'm being honest, I think it just takes away some of that nuance from old fantasy. I feel like now there's a risk that they are going to be turning the magic phase into just stratagems. You know, you get a unit in combat and you think, okay, I will use this stratagem, aka spell, to boost their power, rather than having this whole phase of play and counterplay and trying to bait out dispel dice from an opponent, having to decide which powers you really need to get off before you've seen any damage that you've done from, say, shooting, for example. You know, do you do this damaging magic missile style spell into that unit of skirmishes in the hope that they'll die and then your archers can shoot at something else? Or do you hold off and just hope your archers are going to kill them so that you can instead get this buff off so that that other unit you've charged in is now going to be better in combat? There just sounds like there's going to be potentially a lot less of that decision making because you can just do whatever spell you have available whenever is the most opportune time to do it, rather than having to plan it all out for the magic phase and hope that you get the spells off that you wanted to get off and that they were the right ones to do for the situation as the combats go on. To me, it just felt really fun and unique to play through the magic phase in previous editions of Fantasy, and as I said, I'm just a bit concerned it's going to turn into Stratagems 2.0. Although I will say for the magic phase, there is one change they mentioned that is good, and that is that the big game-ending spells like the Lurker's Blow or Pit of Shades and all that seem to be going, or at least are going to be much, much rarer now, which is good, because let's be honest, those spells aren't particularly fun, and by the end of 8th edition, they were kind of just toxic in general, and you would just have entire units being wiped out, or just things that you couldn't really defend against. I like the idea of spells doing some damage, but not just being able to delete an entire unit with very little counterplay apart from like a dispel scroll. The final change they mention in the article is actually a really interesting and potentially a very, very cool one, I think. In 8th edition, when you beat an enemy and they failed their break test, you could end up running away, and essentially you fell back 2d6 inches, and the enemy could chase you and roll 2d6 as well, and if they caught you, they would just cut down your entire unit in one fell swoop. Instead, in the old world, it sounds like it's going to be a more progressive shifting system, with units, instead of running away and being wiped out, being pushed back and having to give ground to the opponent. So there won't be this just one massive overrun that wipes out your main unit anymore. They will just slowly get pushed further and further back towards your own deployment as the enemy overpowers them and makes ground upon them, which to me just sounds really thematic and really cool for like big battles, and it will give games, I think, this real ebb and flow as you see units moving up and meeting in the middle and then just slowly being pushed backwards and then regaining ground as the combats go for better or for worse in your favor. And I mean, yeah, I really love the idea of that. I think it's going to bring some really cool imagery to your games as you see units being pushed back and then regaining ground as you roll some hot dice and start to win the combat, as well as give you some brilliant tactical options with baiting a unit in, knowing that your unit is probably going to lose and will end up giving ground, but then setting the enemy unit up for some flank charges as they push your kind of sacrificial unit backwards, and then you have maybe some cavalry that will be on the side that can then charge into the side and just do a load of damage to the enemy unit that's overstrung itself, or at the very least you can just bait a unit and get them out of position for the rest of their battle plan. So I think there is going to be a load of cool tactical options for this style of break test and morale, rather than just either overrunning a unit and wiping it out completely, or for things like undead where they just would crumble away. So I really like that change, and I think it's going to be really good for the game and also be a lot more interesting for the players as they potentially regain ground as they start to win a combat if things start to turn around. I think overall, from what we've heard so far, the old world does sound like it's going to be fun. As I said, really can't wait to try it out. I just have a few bugbears, and I hope that the magic system doesn't become too simplified and turn into a stratagem style mechanic. And I really hope that there are still some pros and cons to doing wide frontages compared to the long, narrow ones that certain armies really benefited from previously. And I think personally, maybe this is just me. I know I mentioned the old wraparound mechanic, which I think was from 6th edition. But to me, if a model isn't in base contact with another, at least diagonally, they probably shouldn't be able to fight unless they have a weapon like a spear or a pike or a polearm that would maybe specifically allow them to. So it gives you different units that have different weaponry, a bit more niche and interaction in the game as well. So I would much prefer that style of system, I think, rather than just allowing anything in sort of the front rank, maybe the front 2 ranks, to attack as long as, you know, at least a few models in it were able to. But that is going to be it for this video. As I said, I really cannot wait for the old world, and I think in general it is going to be really, really fun. But as always, I'd love to know what you think of the old world news we've had so far, and are there any aspects or rules or mechanics from previous editions of Fantasy that you are hoping will make a return? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.